My mother-in-law literally pulled my wedding ring off my finger during Sunday dinner at her house, claimed it belonged to her family and that I had no right to wear it. Then my billionaire father found out what happened and made one phone call. That resulted in her losing her house, her car, and now she's hired a lawyer trying to sue us for financial terrorism, while convincing half the family that I'm a spoiled rich girl who destroyed her life over a piece of jewelry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hey everyone, I'm still shaking as I record this because I honestly cannot believe what my life has become in the past 3 weeks. I thought I knew what family drama looked like, but this situation has completely spiraled beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I'm Sophia. I'm 29 years old, and I live here in Millbrook Heights with my husband, Marcus. What started as a simple family dinner has turned into a legal nightmare that's torn our entire family apart, and I'm still trying to process how we got here. I need to share this story because people keep asking me if the rumors they're hearing are true. And honestly, the rumors don't even come close to capturing how insane this whole situation really is. My mother-in-law, Patricia Blackwood, has always been what I'd politely call strong-willed. But what happened 3 weeks ago crossed every line I didn't even know existed. And when my father found out what she'd done to me, well, let's just say that Patricia discovered very quickly that there are consequences to messing with certain people's daughters. I know this sounds like something out of a soap opera, but I swear on everything I hold dear that every word I'm about to tell you actually happened. The ring theft, the dinner from hell, my father's phone call, Patricia losing everything, the lawsuit threats, the family choosing sides, all of it. And the worst part? It's not even over. Patricia is still fighting this battle she created. And every day brings some new level of crazy that I didn't think was possible. Before I dive into the main story, I need you to understand something about my family background, because it's crucial to understanding why this whole thing exploded the way it did. My father, Vincent Castellano, is what you'd call extremely successful. He built his tech empire from nothing, starting in his garage when I was a baby, and now Castellano Industries is worth about $2.3 billion. Growing up, I always knew we had money, but my parents worked really hard to keep me grounded. I went to public school, had a part-time job in high school, and earned my college degree in education because I wanted to be a teacher, not because I had to work. The thing about having a father like mine is that most people don't know about the family connection. I kept my maiden name professionally. Marcus and I live in a normal neighborhood, and we drive regular cars. We're not flashy people. My father's wealth has always been this background thing in my life, a safety net I hoped I'd never need, but also something that's made me very careful about who I trust and why people want to be close to me. That's actually how I knew Marcus was different when we met 4 years ago at a teachers' conference in Portland. He had no idea who my father was, never asked about my family's money, and fell in love with me just for being me. When I finally told him about my father's business about 6 months into our relationship, Marcus was honestly more concerned about whether I thought he was with me for the wrong reasons than impressed by the family wealth. That's when I knew he was the one. Marcus's family, on the other hand, is what you'd call solidly middle class. His father, Thomas, works as a manager at the local Ford dealership, and Patricia has been a part-time bookkeeper for various small businesses around Millbrook Heights for the past 15 years. They live in a nice 3-bedroom house in the Oakwood subdivision, drive decent cars, and take 1 vacation a year to visit Thomas's sister in Arizona. Normal, hard-working people living a comfortable but not extravagant life. When Marcus and I got engaged 2 years ago, I made the mistake of being completely honest with his parents about my family background. I thought they deserved to know, especially since my father was paying for our wedding, and they'd probably figure it out anyway when they saw the guest list and venue. Thomas took the news pretty well. He was actually kind of relieved that his son had found someone from a stable, successful family. Patricia's reaction was different. At first, she seemed excited about having a daughter-in-law from a wealthy family. She'd make little comments about how nice it must be to never worry about money, and how she hoped Marcus and I would be generous with our future children's grandparents. Red flags, but I tried to be understanding. Then came the wedding planning, and Patricia started making suggestions about how we should spend our money. Bigger venue, more expensive flowers, upgraded everything. When I gently explained that while my father was generously covering the wedding costs, Marcus and I made our own financial decisions, Patricia's attitude shifted. She started making passive-aggressive comments about how I was too good for their family, how Marcus was forgetting where he came from, and how she hoped the money wouldn't change him. The worst part was how she'd say these things with a smile, like they were jokes, but everyone could feel the tension underneath. Marcus tried to mediate, but Patricia had this way of making her comments when he wasn't around, then acting completely innocent when he confronted her about it. The ring that's at the center of this whole mess is my wedding ring, and it's honestly the most beautiful piece of jewelry I've ever owned. It's a custom design that Marcus worked on for months with a jeweler in the city, a platinum band with a 2-carat oval diamond center stone surrounded by smaller diamonds in an Art Deco setting. Marcus spent his entire savings on it, plus took out a small loan, because he wanted to give me something that represented how much he loved me. The ring cost about $18,000, which I know is a lot of money, but Marcus insisted he wanted to buy it himself without any help from my family. What made the ring even more special was the story behind it. Marcus had saved every extra dollar for 2 years, working overtime at his job as a software engineer, taking on freelance projects, even selling his beloved motorcycle to help pay for it. When he proposed to me on the beach in Sunset Cove, he told me that every sacrifice he made to buy that ring was worth it, because he wanted me to have something that represented not just his love, but his commitment to building our life together, with his own hands and hard work. I cried so hard that night, not just because I was engaged, but because I'd never had someone love me so purely, without any consideration for what my family could provide. Patricia knew this story. She knew how much the ring meant to both of us, how hard Marcus had worked for it, and how proud he was to have bought it entirely on his own. She'd even commented several times about what a beautiful ring it was, and how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband. That's why what happened at dinner 3 weeks ago was so shocking and hurtful. She knew exactly what she was taking from us, and she did it anyway. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened that Sunday evening at Patricia's house was just the beginning of this nightmare. And honestly, if someone had told me 3 weeks ago that my quiet Sunday dinner would end with my mother-in-law losing her house and threatening to sue my family, I would have laughed. Now I'm not laughing at all. I'm scared, I'm angry, and I'm completely bewildered by how one moment of greed and entitlement has destroyed so many relationships and caused so much pain. The scariest part is that Patricia still doesn't think she did anything wrong, and every day she finds new ways to escalate this situation. Yesterday, she called my workplace trying to get me fired, claiming I was emotionally unstable and dangerous to be around children. Thank God my principal knows me well enough to see through that nonsense, but the fact that she's trying to destroy my career over this is just, I don't even have words. So buckle up, because this story is about to get absolutely wild, and honestly, I'm still living through it, so I don't even know how it's going to end. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me properly introduce everyone involved in this disaster, because understanding these personalities is crucial to understanding how everything went so wrong so fast. First, there's my husband Marcus. He's 31, works as a senior software engineer at Riverside Tech Solutions here in Millbrook Heights, and he's honestly the most genuine person I've ever met. Marcus is the type of guy who still opens doors for me, remembers to call his grandmother every Sunday, and has never once asked my father for money or connections, even when we were struggling to save for our house down payment. He's got this quiet confidence about him, never tries to prove anything to anyone, and treats everyone with the same respect, whether they're a janitor or a CEO. That's actually what first attracted me to him, in a world where so many people change their behavior around me once they find out about my family's money. Marcus has always just been Marcus. But Marcus has one weakness, and that's his mother. Patricia raised him as a single mom for the first 8 years of his life after his biological father abandoned them, and even though Thomas adopted Marcus when he was 9 and has been an amazing father to him, Marcus still feels this deep loyalty to Patricia for the sacrifices she made during those early years. She's used that guilt his entire life to manipulate him, and even though he's gotten better at setting boundaries since we got married, he still struggles to fully stand up to her when she crosses lines. Then there's Patricia Blackwood, age 54. And honestly, where do I even begin? On the surface, Patricia presents herself as this sweet, small-town mom who works hard and loves her family. She's about 5'4", always has her blonde hair perfectly styled, and dresses like she's trying to look more expensive than she actually is. You know the type. She volunteers at the local animal shelter, organizes the neighborhood Christmas party every year, and makes these incredible chocolate chip cookies that everyone raves about. If you met her at a grocery store, you'd probably think she was lovely. But underneath that facade, Patricia is manipulative, entitled, and has this weird obsession with status and money that she tries to hide but can't quite manage. She's the type of person who name drops constantly, always mentions when she's bought something designer, even if it's from an outlet mall, and somehow manages to work her financial struggles into every conversation in a way that makes you feel obligated to help her. She's also incredibly possessive of Marcus and has never really accepted that he's an adult with his own life. The interesting thing about Patricia is that she's actually quite intelligent. She's just chosen to use that intelligence for manipulation rather than building something positive. She knows exactly what to say to make people feel guilty, how to play the victim when she's caught doing something wrong. And she's mastered this ability to twist situations so that she somehow ends up being the one who deserves sympathy. It's actually impressive in a terrifying way. Thomas, Marcus's stepfather, is Patricia's complete opposite. He's 56, works at Millbrook Ford, where he's been Employee of the Month probably 20 times, and he's just this solid, dependable guy who minds his own business and treats everyone fairly. Thomas genuinely loves Marcus like his own son, and he's never once made Marcus feel like he owed him anything for stepping up when his biological father left. He's the kind of man who fixes neighbors' cars for free, coaches Little League on weekends, and always remembers people's birthdays. The sad thing about Thomas is that he's completely blind to Patricia's manipulative side. He sees her as this woman who struggled as a single mom and deserves to be protected and cared for. When Patricia starts her dramatic episodes, Thomas immediately jumps into protector mode, which usually means everyone else gets blamed for upsetting her. He's not a bad person. He's actually wonderful. But Patricia has him so thoroughly convinced that she's always the victim that he enables her behavior without even realizing it. Now, my father Vincent is a whole different story. At 58, he's built Castellano Industries from literally nothing into a tech empire that employs about 12,000 people across 6 countries. But here's the thing about my dad. He didn't get where he is by being nice. He's brilliant, absolutely ruthless in business, and has this ability to see through people's BS that's almost supernatural. Growing up, I watched him demolish business partners who tried to cheat him, destroy competitors who played dirty, and completely ruin people who threatened his family. But with family, Dad is completely different. He's patient, generous, and surprisingly gentle. He taught me to ride a bike, came to every school play, and never once made me feel like I had to earn his love or approval. The flip side is that he's incredibly protective of the people he cares about. My mom always jokes that Dad has 2 settings, loving family man and corporate destroyer, with no middle ground between them. My mother, Elena, is 55 and works as a pediatric, surgeon at Children's Hospital in the city. She's brilliant, compassionate, and has this way of cutting through drama with surgical precision, no pun intended. Mom grew up middle class, met Dad when they were both in college, and she's always been very conscious about not letting wealth change who we are as people. She's the one who insisted I go to public school, work summer jobs, and understand the value of money. Mom gets along with most people, but she has zero tolerance for manipulation or fake behavior. The few times she's met Patricia, I could tell she saw right through the act, but Mom's too polite to say anything directly. However, if you push Mom too far or threaten her family, she can be just as scary as Dad in her own way. Finally, there's me. I'm Sophia Castellano-Martinez. I kept both names when I married Marcus because I wanted to honor both families. I'm 29, I teach 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary, and I absolutely love my job. I chose teaching because I genuinely enjoy working with kids and making a difference in their lives, not because I needed the income. My salary is about $52,000 a year, which is comfortable but not extravagant. And I've always been proud to live on what I earn rather than relying on family. Money. I'm generally a pretty easygoing person. I avoid conflict when possible, always try to see the best in people, and I tend to give others the benefit of the doubt, sometimes to my own detriment. My friends often tell me I'm too trusting, and Marcus jokes that I could find something nice to say about a serial killer. But I also have boundaries, and once someone crosses them, especially when it comes to family or fairness, I can be surprisingly tough. The thing about growing up wealthy is that you develop this radar for people who want to use you. I've had friends who suddenly became interested in expensive restaurants when they found out about Dad's money, boyfriends who started hinting about trips and gifts, and even teachers who began treating me differently once they figured out my family's situation. It's made me cautious about new relationships, but it's also made me incredibly grateful for the people who love me for who I am, not what I can provide. Marcus and I met at an education conference in Portland 4 years ago. I was presenting on innovative teaching methods for struggling readers, and he was there because Riverside Tech was sponsoring the event and needed someone to handle their technology setup. We ended up talking during a coffee break about how technology could better support students with learning differences, and I was immediately impressed by how thoughtful and genuinely interested he was in education, even though it wasn't his field. We exchanged numbers, supposedly to continue our conversation about educational technology, but really because there was this immediate connection between us. Marcus called me 3 days later to ask if I wanted to get dinner and continue our discussion about adaptive learning software. We both knew it was a date. What I loved about Marcus from the beginning was how normal he made me feel. He didn't Google me, didn't ask probing questions about my family, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts about teaching, my hobbies, and my dreams for the future. When I told him about my father's business 6 months into our relationship, Marcus's first reaction was concern that I might think he was dating me for the wrong reasons, not excitement about what the connection might mean for him. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and during that time, Marcus met my parents several times but never once asked my father for business advice, connections, or favors. Dad was impressed by this, and Mom absolutely adored Marcus from their first meeting. They could see that he loved me for me, not for what our family could provide, and that meant everything to them. Marcus proposed on the beach in Sunset Cove, about an hour's drive from Millbrook Heights, on a Saturday evening in October. He'd planned this elaborate picnic with all my favorite foods, and as the sun was setting, he got down on one knee and gave this speech about how I'd made him want to be the best version of himself, and how he couldn't imagine building a future with anyone else. The ring was absolutely perfect, and when I found out later how hard he'd worked and saved to buy it himself, I fell in love with him all over again. We got married 8 months later in a beautiful ceremony at the Grandview Country Club, with about 150 guests. Dad paid for the wedding, which was generous but also practical since most of our guest list was his business associates and family friends. Patricia made several comments during the planning process about how lucky we were to have such a generous father-in-law, and how she hoped Marcus wouldn't forget his roots now that he was marrying into money. The wedding itself was perfect, though Patricia did manage to cause some drama by wearing a dress that was almost white and making a toast that included several passive-aggressive comments about how she hoped I would take good care of her boy, and remember that love is more important than money. Most people didn't catch the subtext, but my family definitely did. After the wedding, Marcus and I bought a house in the Riverside neighborhood of Millbrook Heights, a nice 3-bedroom place that we could afford on our combined salaries. Dad offered to help with the down payment, but Marcus politely declined, saying he wanted us to build our life together using our own resources. I was proud of him for that, and honestly, Dad respected him even more for turning down the help. For the first year and a half of our marriage, things were relatively peaceful with Patricia. She'd make her little comments, but nothing too dramatic. And Marcus was getting better at shutting down her manipulation attempts. Thomas was always kind to me, and family dinners were usually pleasant enough, even if I had to bite my tongue occasionally when Patricia made her passive-aggressive remarks. But about 6 months ago, something changed. Patricia started becoming more bold with her comments about money, more critical of our lifestyle choices, and more possessive of Marcus. She began showing up at our house unannounced, calling Marcus multiple times a day, and making demands about how we should spend our time and money. It was like she suddenly decided that my family's wealth should somehow benefit her directly, and she was frustrated that it wasn't happening. That's the background you need to understand what happened 3 weeks ago at what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. Looking back now, I can see that Patricia's behavior had been escalating for months before the dinner incident. But at the time, I kept making excuses for her because I wanted to believe she was just adjusting to having me in the family. The signs were all there, getting progressively worse, but I was so focused on keeping the peace that I ignored my own instincts screaming that something was seriously wrong. It started about 8 months ago with what I now realize were financial probing missions disguised as casual conversation. Patricia would ask seemingly innocent questions about our mortgage payment, what Marcus was making at his new position, whether we were comfortable financially. When I'd deflect or give vague answers, she'd get this look. Not angry exactly, but calculating, like she was filing away information for later use. Then came the comments about my family's money, which became more frequent and less subtle over time. During a family barbecue last summer, Patricia cornered me while I was helping with dishes and said, "You know, Sophia, it must be so nice never having to worry about money. Some of us aren't so lucky." When I tried to explain that Marcus and I live on our own salaries and budget carefully like everyone else, she laughed this bitter laugh and said, "Oh, honey, you can pretend all you want, but we all know Daddy's money is always there if you need it." What made that conversation particularly uncomfortable was the way she said, "Daddy's money," with this sneering tone that made it clear she thought I was some spoiled princess playing house with her son. I told Marcus about it later, and he confronted her, but Patricia immediately switched into victim mode, claiming she was just making conversation and couldn't understand why I was so sensitive about family discussions. The pattern became clearer after that. Patricia would make inappropriate comments when Marcus wasn't around, then act completely innocent when confronted. She developed this habit of bringing up financial struggles in front of me, always with this expectant look like she was waiting for me to offer help. When I didn't take the bait, she'd make pointed remarks about how some people forget where they come from or how money changes people. Around Christmas time, things got worse. Patricia started making comments about our gift giving, analyzing everything we bought for the family and making calculations about what we could afford versus what we were spending. When we gave Thomas and her a nice weekend getaway package to a bed and breakfast in the mountains, something that cost us about $400, She made this big show of being overwhelmed by our generosity, but then immediately started talking about all the things she needed money for: car repairs, home improvements, credit card debt. The most uncomfortable moment came when she pulled me aside at their New Year's Eve party and said, "Sophia, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Thomas and I have been struggling a bit financially lately. Nothing serious, just some unexpected expenses. I know your family is very generous, and I was wondering if maybe you could talk to your father about possibly helping us out. Just a small loan, maybe $15,000 or $20,000. We'd pay it back, of course." I was stunned, not just by the amount, which wasn't small for most people, but by the assumption that I would ask my father to loan money to my in-laws. I tried to explain gently that my father doesn't mix family relationships with financial arrangements, and that Marcus and I handle our own finances separately from my parents. Patricia's face changed completely. The sweet, hopeful expression disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I see," she said. "So the money's there, but you just don't want to share it with Marcus's family. I guess we know where we stand now." That conversation haunted me for weeks. I told Marcus about it, and he was mortified. He had a serious talk with Patricia about boundaries and inappropriate requests, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. She started making comments about how I was changing Marcus, making him forget his family, and how she worried that money would corrupt our marriage. February brought a new level of intrusion. Patricia started showing up at our house unannounced, always with some excuse. She was in the neighborhood, she brought us leftovers, she wanted to check on our garden. But I noticed she was always looking around, taking inventory of our belongings, making mental notes about what we had. She'd comment on new purchases, ask where we got things, and make pointed observations about how nice it must be to afford such quality items. The most invasive incident happened on a Saturday afternoon when Marcus was at his buddy's house helping with a plumbing project. I was grading papers in our home office when I heard the front door open. I called out, thinking Marcus had come home early, but Patricia's voice answered back. "Just me, dear. I brought you that recipe I promised." I came downstairs to find Patricia not in the kitchen where you'd expect someone delivering a recipe to be, but in our living room, going through the mail on our coffee table. When she saw me, she didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, I was just tidying up for you," she said. But I could see she'd been looking through our bank statements and credit card bills. "You really should be more careful about leaving personal documents lying around." I was so shocked by the blatant invasion of privacy that I couldn't even respond immediately. By the time I found my voice to tell her that going through our mail was completely inappropriate, she'd already switched tactics. "Sophia, honey, I'm worried about you and Marcus. These credit card bills are quite high for a young couple. Are you sure you're managing your finances responsibly? Maybe you should ask your father for some advice about budgeting." The manipulation was breathtaking. She'd violated our privacy, then tried to make it seem like she was concerned about our financial well-being, while simultaneously suggesting we needed my father's help. When I told her firmly that our finances were none of her business and asked her to leave, she started crying. "I'm just trying to help," she sobbed. "I raised Marcus to be responsible with money, and I'm worried that all this wealth is going to his head. I don't want to see him make mistakes that could hurt your marriage." By the time Marcus got home, an hour later, Patricia had composed herself and was sitting in our kitchen, looking like the picture of maternal concern. She told him she'd stopped by to bring the recipe and found me very upset about something. When I explained what had really happened, Patricia looked genuinely confused. "Oh, Sophia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just straightening up the coffee table, and I couldn't help but notice the bills. I was only concerned because the amount seemed high for your income level. I didn't mean anything by it." Marcus believed her, or at least wanted to believe her, and I found myself in the impossible position of looking like the unreasonable one. for being upset about what she framed as innocent concern. This became Patricia's signature move, violating boundaries, then reframing her behavior as care or concern when confronted. She'd go through our things and call it helping with organization. She'd ask intrusive financial questions and call it family interest. She'd make demands and call them suggestions. March brought the most disturbing escalation yet. Patricia started calling my workplace, claiming to be concerned about my stress levels, and asking my principal if I seemed overwhelmed lately. She told Mrs. Henderson, my principal, that she was worried about me because I'd seemed anxious and defensive during family gatherings, and she wondered if I was having trouble adjusting to married life. Mrs. Henderson, thankfully, saw through this immediately and told me about the calls. She said Patricia had asked several inappropriate questions about my job performance, my relationships with colleagues, and whether I'd mentioned having family troubles at work. When Mrs. Henderson refused to discuss my personal life, Patricia had become pushy, insisting that as my concerned mother-in-law, she had a right to know if I was struggling. That's when I realized Patricia wasn't just being inappropriate or boundary crossing. She was actively trying to undermine me, to find ammunition she could use to make me look unstable or problematic. The scariest part was how calculated it all was. She was building a case against me, collecting evidence of my supposed problems, and positioning herself as the concerned family member trying to help. I told Marcus about the workplace calls, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely angry at his mother's behavior. He confronted Patricia directly, and she denied making the calls at first, then claimed she'd only called once because she was worried about me after I'd seemed upset at our last family dinner. "I'm her mother-in-law," she told Marcus. "It's natural for me to be concerned about her well-being. If she's having problems at work, don't you think we should know about it? I'm trying to help your marriage by staying involved." Marcus told her in no uncertain terms that calling my workplace was completely inappropriate and that she needed to stop involving herself in our personal lives. Patricia cried, of course, and accused Marcus of choosing me over his family, but he held firm. For about 3 weeks after that confrontation, Patricia backed off. No surprise visits, no invasive questions, no inappropriate phone calls. I started to hope that maybe she'd finally understood the boundaries we'd set and would respect them going forward. I should have known better. Patricia wasn't backing off. She was planning. And what she was planning would make all her previous boundary violations look like minor annoyances compared to what was coming. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 22 days. I know because I counted them later, wondering how I could have been so naive as to think Patricia had actually changed her behavior rather than just changing her strategy. Looking back, I realized she spent those 3 weeks watching us, studying our routines, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to make her biggest move yet. That opportunity came on a Sunday evening in April, at what was supposed to be a simple family dinner at Patricia and Thomas's house. If I'd known what Patricia was planning, I would have never walked through their front door that night. But I didn't know, and by the time I figured out what was happening, it was too late to stop the chain of events that would destroy our family, relationships, and ultimately lead to Patricia losing everything she'd worked so hard to build. The ring that would become the center of this entire disaster represents everything beautiful about my relationship with Marcus, which is probably why Patricia's obsession with it felt so violating and personal. I need to tell you the full story of this ring because understanding what it means to us and what it came to represent to Patricia is crucial to understanding how everything spiraled so completely out of control. When Marcus decided he wanted to propose, he spent months researching engagement rings, not because he didn't know what I'd like, but because he wanted to create something that would tell the story of our relationship. He'd noticed that I always admired vintage jewelry, especially pieces from the 1920s and 1930s, and he loved how my eyes lit up whenever we walked past antique shops or estate jewelry displays. But Marcus being Marcus, he didn't want to just buy something that existed. He wanted to create something that was uniquely ours. He found a jeweler in downtown Portland named Alessandro Benedetti, an elderly Italian man who specialized in custom pieces inspired by antique designs. Marcus spent hours with Alessandro, describing not just what he wanted the ring to look like, but what he wanted it to represent. He told Alessandro about how we met, about my love for vintage aesthetics, about how he wanted the ring to symbolize both timeless elegance and our modern love story. What they created together was absolutely breathtaking. The center stone is a 2-carat oval diamond, perfectly cut and completely flawless, set in a platinum band with intricate Art Deco detailing. Surrounding the center diamond are 20 smaller diamonds arranged in a geometric pattern that's both classic and contemporary. The band itself is a work of art, with delicate engraving and mill-grain detailing that catches the light from every angle. But the most special part of the ring isn't visible to anyone but me and Marcus. On the inside of the band, Alessandro engraved a tiny compass rose, a symbol Marcus chose because he said I was his true north, the person who helped him navigate life's challenges and find his way home. Below the compass rose are our initials and the coordinates of the beach in Sunset Cove, where we had our first real conversation about building a future together. The ring cost $18,000, which I know sounds like a lot of money, but you have to understand what that represented for Marcus. His salary at the time was about $75,000 a year, so this ring cost nearly a quarter of his annual income before taxes. He saved for almost 2 years, working overtime whenever possible, taking on freelance coding projects on weekends, and making sacrifices that I didn't even know about until after we were engaged. I later learned that Marcus had been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day for 8 months to save money. He'd canceled his gym membership, stopped going out with friends, sold his motorcycle, and even moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment to put every possible dollar toward the ring fund. When his coworkers would suggest grabbing drinks after work or going to a baseball game, Marcus would decline, making excuses about being tired or having other plans because he didn't want to admit he was saving every penny for an engagement ring. The most touching part was that Marcus never once considered asking my father for help or advice about the ring, even though he knew Dad could have easily afforded something much more expensive. Marcus wanted this to be entirely his gift to me, earned through his own hard work and sacrifice. He later told me that every extra hour he worked, every sacrifice he made, felt meaningful because it was all building toward the moment he could ask me to marry him. When Marcus finally proposed on that beach in Sunset Cove, the ring was even more beautiful than I could have imagined. But what made me cry wasn't just the stunning design. It was learning about everything he'd done to make it possible. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a physical representation of Marcus's love, dedication, and commitment to building our life together with his own hands and heart. From the moment I started wearing the ring, people noticed it. It's the kind of piece that catches light and draws attention, and I received compliments constantly. Friends would ask to see it up close, coworkers would admire it during meetings, and strangers would sometimes comment on it in grocery store lines. I was proud to wear it, not because of its monetary value, but because of the love story it represented. Patricia's reaction to the ring was complicated from the very beginning. When Marcus first showed it to his parents after our engagement, she made all the appropriate comments about how beautiful it was and how lucky I was to have such a thoughtful fiancé. But I noticed she kept asking detailed questions about the specifications, the carat weight, the cut quality, where it was purchased, how much it cost. Marcus deflected most of these questions, but Patricia was persistent. During our engagement party at my parents' house, I caught Patricia taking photos of my ring when she thought no one was looking. When I asked her about it, she said she wanted to show her sister how beautiful it was, but something about the way she was examining it felt odd. She held my hand much longer than necessary, turning it to catch the light from different angles, and asking if she could try it on, just to see how it looks. I politely declined, explaining that the ring was sized specifically for me and would probably be too small for her fingers anyway. Patricia's expression changed for just a moment, a flash of something that looked almost angry, before she smiled and said she understood completely. Over the following months, Patricia's comments about the ring became more frequent and increasingly inappropriate. She'd make observations about how I was lucky to have such an expensive piece of jewelry, how I should be careful wearing it in certain places, and how it was quite a responsibility to own something so valuable. She began telling people that Marcus had spent way too much on the ring, and that she'd tried to talk him out of such an extravagant purchase. The most uncomfortable conversation happened about 6 months after our wedding, when Patricia cornered me at a family birthday party and said, "You know, Sophia, I've been thinking about that ring of yours. It's really quite valuable, isn't it? Have you considered what would happen if something happened to you? I mean, Marcus would want it to stay in the family, and since you don't have any sisters or daughters, well, these things are important to think about." I was so taken aback by the morbid conversation that I didn't know how to respond. Patricia continued, "I'm not trying to be morbid, dear, but practical. Family heirlooms should be planned for, and that ring represents such a significant investment. Maybe you should talk to Marcus about putting it in a safety deposit box or something. It seems risky to wear it every day." When I told Marcus about this conversation later, he was appalled. He explained to Patricia that the ring was mine, period, and that any future decisions about it would be made by me and me alone. Patricia acted hurt that Marcus would think she had ulterior motives, claiming she was just concerned about protecting the family's investment. But Patricia's obsession with the ring didn't stop there. She started making comments about how I wore it, suggesting I was showing off when I wore it to nice restaurants or family events. She'd make pointed observations about how I never took it off, implying that I was somehow flaunting it inappropriately. When I did occasionally remove it for activities like gardening or cleaning, Patricia would immediately notice and comment on it. "Oh, where's your ring today, Sophia? Not wearing it? That's probably smart. Wouldn't want anything to happen to it." The comments were always framed as concern or practical advice, but there was something underneath them that made me increasingly uncomfortable. It felt like Patricia was studying my habits with the ring, learning when I wore it and when I didn't, almost like she was gathering intelligence. Things escalated when Patricia started suggesting that I should get the ring appraised for insurance purposes and offering to recommend an appraiser she knew. When I explained that we already had it properly insured through our homeowner's policy, she insisted that wasn't enough and that I needed a separate jewelry policy with detailed documentation. "You never know what could happen," she'd say. "Theft, loss, damage, these things happen more often than you think. You need to protect yourself and Marcus's investment." Patricia also began making comments about how the ring was too nice for everyday wear, suggesting I should save it for special occasions and wear a simpler wedding band for daily activities. When I explained that I loved wearing it every day because it reminded me of Marcus's love and sacrifice, Patricia would get this look, like she couldn't understand why I was being so sentimental about just jewelry. The most disturbing incident happened during a family dinner about 2 months before the disaster. I was helping Patricia clear the table when she grabbed my hand to look at the ring more closely. "You know," she said, holding my hand uncomfortably tight, "this ring really is remarkable. Alessandro did beautiful work. Have you ever thought about having it reset? Maybe in a more modern style? I know an excellent jeweler who could update the setting while keeping the same stones." I pulled my hand away and told her firmly that I loved the ring exactly as it was and had no intention of changing anything about it. Patricia's grip had been so tight that my finger was red where she'd held it, and something about the way she'd been examining the ring felt predatory. "Well," she said, her voice taking on that cold tone I'd learned to recognize, "I suppose some people are more sentimental about these things than others. I just think it's important to be practical about valuable assets." That word, assets, stuck with me for weeks. Patricia wasn't talking about my wedding ring as a symbol of love or commitment. To her, it was an asset, a valuable commodity that she felt somehow entitled to have opinions about, plans for, or even claims on. Looking back now, I can see that Patricia had been building towards something for months. Her obsession with the ring, her inappropriate comments and suggestions, her studying of my habits and routines, it was all leading somewhere. She'd been planning something, waiting for the right opportunity, the right moment when she could make her move. That moment came 3 weeks ago, on what should have been a peaceful Sunday evening with family. If I'd understood then what Patricia was really planning, what she really wanted, I never would have walked into that house wearing my ring. But I didn't understand, and by the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop her. The 3 weeks leading up to the dinner disaster were unlike anything I'd ever experienced with Patricia. It was as if she'd decided that her previous subtle manipulations weren't working fast enough, so she was going to ramp up the pressure until something broke. What I didn't realize at the time was that she was specifically targeting the ring as her endgame, and everything else was just preliminary pressure to wear down my defenses. It started with what I now recognize as financial surveillance disguised as family concern. Patricia began asking increasingly specific questions about our household expenses, always framed as helpful interest in our well-being. She'd call Marcus during his lunch breaks at work, ostensibly to chat, but always managing to work in questions about our mortgage payment, utility bills, or whether we were managing okay financially. When Marcus would deflect these questions or tell her our finances were private, Patricia would switch tactics and call me directly. Her approach with me was different, more manipulative and guilt-focused. She'd start conversations by talking about her own financial struggles, mentioning unexpected expenses or repairs they needed, then segueing into questions about whether Marcus and I ever worried about money or if we felt secure in our financial situation. "I just want to make sure you two are being smart about money," she'd say. "Young couples can get in over their heads so easily these days. If you ever need advice about budgeting or managing expenses, Thomas and I have so much experience with stretching dollars." The implication was always that we were financially irresponsible or naive, despite the fact that Marcus and I had excellent credit, healthy savings accounts, and had never missed a payment on anything. But Patricia had this way of making her financial struggles sound like wisdom, and our financial stability sound like ignorance or luck. Then came the surprise visits, which increased dramatically in frequency and became increasingly intrusive. Patricia would show up at our house at odd times, early morning before work, during dinner, late evening when we were clearly settling in for the night. She always had an excuse. She was in the neighborhood, she had leftovers to share, she wanted to borrow something, she was worried about us because we hadn't called recently. But I began to notice patterns in these visits that made me deeply uncomfortable. Patricia would always find reasons to walk through our house, commenting on new purchases, rearranging things to be helpful, and asking detailed questions about where we'd bought various items and how much they'd cost. She'd linger in our bedroom, claiming she wanted to see how we decorated, but I'd catch her examining my jewelry box or looking through items on my dresser. The most disturbing visit happened on a Thursday evening when Marcus was working late, on a project deadline. I was grading papers in our living room when Patricia knocked on the door, claiming she'd brought us a casserole and wanted to make sure I was okay being alone so much while Marcus worked overtime. While I was putting the casserole in the refrigerator, I heard Patricia moving around in our living room. When I came back, she was standing at our dining room table where I'd left my purse and some mail while grading papers. She wasn't actively going through anything, but she was positioned in a way that suggested she'd been looking at the mail, and my purse was slightly moved from where I'd left it. "Sorry, dear," she said when she saw me notice. "I was just admiring your dining room set. Is this the one you bought from that expensive furniture store downtown? It must have cost quite a bit." I didn't answer her question about the furniture. Cost. But I was deeply unsettled by the entire interaction. After Patricia left, I checked my purse and found that items had been moved around inside it. Nothing was missing, but it was clear that someone had been looking through it. The violation of privacy was shocking, but what scared me more was the calculated nature of it. Patricia had waited until Marcus wasn't home, created a reason to be in our house, and used my momentary absence to snoop through my personal belongings. When I told Marcus about the incident, he was finally beginning to see the pattern of his mother's behavior. He confronted Patricia about going through my purse, but she vehemently denied it, claiming she would never do such a thing and acting deeply offended that we would accuse her of such behavior. "I can't believe you would think so poorly of me," she cried to Marcus. "I raised you better than to make such horrible accusations against your mother. Sophia is clearly trying to turn you against me, and it's working." This became Patricia's standard response to any confrontation: deny everything, act victimized, and blame me for poisoning Marcus against her. It was maddening because she was so convincing in her wounded innocence that even Marcus, who had reason to believe me, would sometimes doubt what had really happened. The pressure campaign intensified with what I can only describe as a jewelry obsession phase. Patricia became fixated not just on my wedding ring, but on all of my jewelry. She'd comment on earrings I wore to family gatherings, ask about necklaces I'd received as gifts, and make pointed observations about the expensive taste I'd developed since marrying into money. During one particularly uncomfortable conversation, Patricia told me she'd been thinking about updating her own jewelry collection and asked if I had any recommendations for jewelers or designers. When I mentioned Alessandro, the craftsman who'd made my wedding ring, Patricia's eyes lit up with an intensity that made me immediately regret sharing the information. "Oh, I'd love to meet him," she said. "Maybe you could introduce me sometime? I have some old family pieces that might be worth updating, and if he's good enough for your family's standards, he must be excellent." I deflected the request, saying I'd have to check with Alessandro about his availability, but Patricia didn't let it drop. She brought up the idea of meeting Alessandro multiple times over the following weeks, always with new reasons why she needed his services. She claimed to have inherited jewelry from her grandmother that needed appraisal, mentioned wanting to design a special piece for a milestone anniversary, and even suggested that she and I could go together to look at his work for fun. The most alarming escalation came when Patricia started making comments about my daily routines, specifically noting when I wore my ring and when I didn't. She'd call or text Marcus during the day with observations about my activities that she couldn't possibly know unless she was watching our house. "I saw Sophia working in the garden this morning," she'd tell Marcus. "She wasn't wearing her ring. That's smart of her to be careful with it during messy work." The problem was that our backyard isn't visible from the street, and Patricia had no legitimate reason to know what I was doing in our private garden. When Marcus asked her how she'd seen me gardening, Patricia would give vague answers about being in the neighborhood or driving past at just the right moment. But it became clear that she was deliberately monitoring our house and my activities. I started feeling like I was being stalked in my own neighborhood. I'd catch glimpses of Patricia's car parked on nearby streets, and neighbors began mentioning that they'd seen her walking past our house multiple times a day. When I'd wave or try to approach her, she'd quickly leave, but the surveillance was becoming constant and nerve-wracking. The breaking point in this escalation phase came when Patricia showed up at my school during my lunch break, claiming she wanted to surprise me with a visit and take me out to eat. My principal was confused by the unannounced visit, especially since Patricia had called several times over the previous months with her concerns about my well-being. During lunch, Patricia's behavior was erratic and intense. She kept staring at my hands, making comments about how I always wore my ring, and suggesting that I was taking unnecessary risks by wearing such valuable jewelry to work every day. "What if something happened to it at school?" she asked repeatedly. "Children can be rough, accidents happen, and you'd never forgive yourself if that beautiful ring got damaged because you were careless." She suggested multiple times that I should consider leaving the ring at home during work days, or at least taking it off during certain activities. When I explained that I loved wearing it and felt comfortable with the precautions I took, Patricia became agitated. You're being naive, Sophia. That ring represents a significant financial investment, and you're treating it like costume jewelry. Marcus worked so hard to buy it for you, and you're being irresponsible with his sacrifice. The conversation became so uncomfortable that I cut lunch short and returned to school early. But Patricia followed me back to the building, insisting on walking me to my classroom and meeting my students. She made inappropriate comments about the rough neighborhood where I taught and how dangerous it seemed for someone wearing expensive jewelry. When I told Marcus about Patricia's school visit that evening, he was finally ready to set serious boundaries. He called his mother and told her that surprise visits to my workplace were completely unacceptable and that she needed to respect our privacy and professional boundaries. Patricia's reaction was explosive. She screamed at Marcus over the phone, accusing him of being brainwashed by me and my family's money. She claimed that I was isolating him from his family and turning him into someone she didn't recognize. The conversation ended with Patricia hanging up on Marcus after declaring that she was done being treated like a criminal for caring about her son's well-being. We didn't hear from Patricia for exactly 4 days after that phone call. No texts, no calls, no surprise visits. For a brief moment, I hoped that maybe she'd finally understood that her behavior was inappropriate and was giving us the space we'd asked for. I should have known better. Patricia wasn't backing down. She was planning her final, most dramatic move, and that move was going to happen at what we thought would be a peaceful family dinner, in a way that would shock everyone and ultimately destroy the relationships she claimed to be trying to protect. Looking back, all of these escalating behaviors were Patricia testing boundaries, gathering information, and positioning herself for what she really wanted: my ring. Every question about finances, every surprise visit, every comment about jewelry and security was building toward the moment when she would finally make her play for the one thing she'd become obsessed with taking from me. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Patricia's 4-day silent treatment ended. Marcus received a text message from his mother that was surprisingly normal and pleasant. "Would you and Sophia like to come for Sunday dinner this weekend? I'm making your favorite pot roast, and Thomas has been asking when we'll see you both. Again. 6 p.m.? Let me know. Love, Mom." Marcus showed me the message, and we both felt a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Maybe Patricia had used the time away to reflect on her behavior and was ready to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. The tone of the message was warm but respectful, without any of the manipulation or guilt-tripping that had become her standard communication style. "Maybe she's finally ready to act like a normal mother-in-law," I said to Marcus, though something in my gut still felt uneasy. "The space seems to have been good for her." Marcus was more optimistic than I was. He missed having a good relationship with his mother, and he wanted to believe that Patricia was genuinely trying to make amends. We decided to accept the invitation, but I made Marcus promise that if Patricia started any of her manipulative behavior, we would leave immediately. Sunday evening arrived, and everything seemed perfectly normal as we pulled into Patricia and Thomas's driveway. Their house looked welcoming, with warm lights glowing in the windows and the smell of pot roast drifting from the kitchen. Thomas greeted us at the door with genuine enthusiasm, giving us both warm hugs and asking about our week. Patricia appeared from the kitchen wearing a floral apron, her hair perfectly styled, and a bright smile that seemed more authentic than I'd seen from her in months. She hugged Marcus tightly, kissed my cheek, and immediately started fussing over whether we wanted drinks or appetizers. "I'm so glad you could come," she said, and for a moment, she seemed like the mother-in-law I'd always hoped to have. "I've missed our family dinners. The house feels too quiet without you two here." The first hour of the evening was genuinely pleasant. Thomas regaled us with stories from the car dealership. Patricia shared neighborhood gossip without any barbed comments about money or social status, and Marcus was visibly relaxed in a way I hadn't seen him around his mother in months. I started to feel guilty for being so suspicious of Patricia's motives. Dinner conversation flowed naturally. Patricia asked about my students without making any inappropriate comments about my job or the school's location. She inquired about Marcus's latest project at work without prying into his salary or our financial situation. She even complimented a new sweater I was wearing without making any pointed observations about its cost or where I'd purchased it. I was wearing my wedding ring, as always, and Patricia seemed to be making a conscious effort not to stare at it or make comments about it. A few times I caught her glancing at my hands, but she'd quickly look away and redirect her attention to the conversation. I started to think that maybe our previous confrontations had finally gotten through to her. After we finished the main course, Patricia suggested we move to the living room for dessert and coffee. She'd made Thomas's favorite apple pie, and the evening felt so normal and family-like that I was beginning to hope we'd turned a corner in our relationship. "Sophia, would you mind helping me bring in the dessert plates?" Patricia asked as the men settled into the living room to discuss some baseball game they'd both been following. I followed Patricia into the kitchen, where she already had the pie sliced and plated, along with a tray of coffee cups and cream. As I reached for the tray to carry it to the living room, Patricia suddenly grabbed my left hand. "Oh my goodness. Let me see that ring in this light," she said, her grip on my wrist much tighter than necessary. The kitchen lighting really makes the diamonds sparkle. Before I could pull my hand away, Patricia was examining the ring closely, turning my hand to catch the light from different angles. Her grip was uncomfortable, and something about her intensity made my stomach clench with anxiety. "It really is extraordinary," she murmured, her voice taking on a dreamy quality that I'd never heard before. Alessandro outdid himself with this design. The craftsmanship is museum quality. I tried to pull my hand back, but Patricia's grip tightened. "Patricia, you're hurting me," I said, starting to feel genuinely alarmed. "You know," she continued as if she hadn't heard me, "I've been thinking a lot about family heirlooms lately, about how important it is for precious things to be properly cared for and protected." Her tone had shifted completely from the warm, motherly voice she'd been using all evening to something cold and calculating that made my blood run cold. I pulled harder to free my hand, but Patricia's grip was surprisingly strong. "This ring represents such a significant investment," she continued, her eyes fixed on the diamonds with an intensity that was genuinely frightening. "Marcus sacrificed so much to buy it, and it deserves to be with someone who truly understands its value and importance to this family." "Patricia, let go of my hand right now," I said firmly, but she acted as if she hadn't heard me. "The thing is, Sophia, I don't think you really appreciate what this ring represents. You wear it so casually, like it's just another piece of jewelry. You wear it to work, to the grocery store, gardening. You treat it like costume jewelry, instead of the precious family asset it really is." I was starting to panic. Patricia's grip on my wrist was painful, and her behavior was completely different from the pleasant woman who'd served us dinner an hour earlier. It was like a switch had been flipped, revealing someone I'd never seen before. "Marcus worked himself to exhaustion to buy this ring," she said, her voice getting louder and more agitated. "He sacrificed everything, his social life, his hobbies, his comfort, to give you something beautiful, and you repay that sacrifice by being careless and irresponsible with it." "Patricia, you're scaring me. Let go of my hand and we can talk about this," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while my heart was racing. That's when Patricia did something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Still gripping my wrist with one hand, she used her other hand to grab my wedding ring and started trying to pull it off my finger. "This ring belongs with someone who will treasure it properly," she said, yanking at the ring so hard that it felt like she was going to break my finger. "Someone who understands what Marcus went through to provide it. Someone who won't take it for granted," I screamed. Not just from the physical pain of her trying to force the ring off my finger, but from the shock and violation of what was happening. Patricia was literally trying to steal my wedding ring off my finger, and the look in her eyes was wild and desperate in a way that terrified me. Marcus! I screamed as loudly as I could, using my free hand to try to pry Patricia's fingers off my wrist. Marcus, help me! But Patricia wasn't stopping. She was pulling at the ring with such force that my finger was turning purple, and she was muttering under her breath about how I didn't deserve it, how she would take better care of it, how it needed to stay in the family where it belonged. I heard footsteps running toward the kitchen, and Marcus burst through the doorway with Thomas right behind him. The look on Marcus's face when he saw his mother trying to rip my wedding ring off my finger was something I'll never forget. Complete shock mixed with horror and rage. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" Marcus roared, rushing toward us. But Patricia didn't let go. Even with Marcus and Thomas both yelling at her, she kept pulling at the ring, her face contorted with determination and something that looked like madness. "She doesn't deserve it," Patricia screamed back at Marcus. "She doesn't understand what you sacrificed. This ring should be protected by someone who appreciates its value." It took both Marcus and Thomas to physically pry Patricia's hands off me. When they finally freed my wrist and hand, my finger was bleeding where the ring had cut into my skin from her violent pulling, and I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. But the most shocking part was Patricia's reaction when she realized she hadn't succeeded in getting the ring. She looked at the three of us, her son, her husband, and her daughter-in-law, and instead of showing any remorse or embarrassment for what she'd just done, she started crying and screaming about how unfair we were being to her. "I was trying to protect it," she wailed. "That ring is too valuable to be worn every day. It should be in a safe place where nothing can happen to it. I was trying to help." The complete disconnect from reality was breathtaking. Patricia had just physically attacked me and tried to steal my wedding ring, but in her mind, she was the victim of our unreasonable reaction to her helpful behavior. That's when I knew that this wasn't just about boundary issues or family drama anymore. Patricia had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and there was no going back from what had just happened in that kitchen. The immediate aftermath of Patricia's attack was chaos. I was standing in the kitchen holding my bleeding finger, shaking uncontrollably while Patricia continued wailing about how she was just trying to help, and how we were all overreacting to her concern for the ring's safety. The complete disconnect between what had just happened and her perception of events was so jarring that for a moment, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Marcus was staring at his mother with an expression I'd never seen before, not just anger, but genuine disgust and disbelief. His face had gone completely white, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Thomas looked equally shocked, but in a different way, like he was seeing his wife clearly for the first time and couldn't process what he was witnessing. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he'd been yelling. "You just physically attacked my wife and tried to steal her wedding ring. Do you understand what you just did?" Patricia immediately switched tactics, her tears becoming more dramatic as she reached toward Marcus with trembling hands. "Oh, honey, no! I wasn't attacking anyone. I was trying to protect that beautiful ring from damage. Sophia was being careless with it, and I was just trying to help her understand how precious it is." "Protect it?" Marcus exploded, his composure finally breaking. "You grabbed her wrist so hard you left bruises. You tried to rip her ring off her finger. She's bleeding." "Mom!" I looked down at my hand and saw that Marcus was right. There were already dark marks forming around my wrist where Patricia had gripped me, and my ring finger was still bleeding where the band had cut into my skin during her violent pulling. Thomas, who had been silent since helping to pry Patricia off me, finally found his voice. "Patricia, what the hell has gotten into you? You can't just grab people and take their jewelry. What were you thinking?" But Patricia wasn't listening to Thomas either. She was focused entirely on Marcus, using every manipulation technique I'd watched her deploy over the past 2 years. The tears, the trembling voice, the wounded expression. It was all there, but amplified to a degree that felt almost theatrical. "Marcus, please, you have to understand, she pleaded, reaching for him again. That ring cost you $18,000. $18,000. Do you know how many months you worked overtime? How many sacrifices you made? And she wears it everywhere like it's nothing special. To work, to the grocery store, even gardening. What if something happened to it? What if it got damaged or lost? All your hard work, all your sacrifice, gone because she doesn't understand how to properly care for something so valuable. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia had just committed what was essentially robbery and assault, but she was trying to frame it as concern for Marcus's financial investment and my supposed carelessness. She was making herself the protector of his interests, and me, the irresponsible, threat to his sacrifice. But this time, Marcus wasn't falling for it. "Mom, stop. Just stop talking," he said firmly. "I don't care what that ring cost. I don't care where Sophia wears it or how she takes care of it. It's her ring. I gave it to her, and it belongs to her. You had no right to touch it, and you had no right to put your hands on my wife." Patricia's expression shifted when she realized her usual tactics weren't working. The tears dried up instantly, replaced by something cold and calculating that I'd glimpsed before, but never seen fully unleashed. "Your wife," she said, pronouncing the words like they tasted bitter. "Your wife who's turned you against your own mother. Your wife whose rich daddy has made you forget where you came from and who raised you. Don't you dare bring Sophia's family into this," Marcus warned. But Patricia was just getting started. "Oh, I see exactly what's happening here," she continued, her voice rising. "Miss Princess with her billionaire daddy thinks she's too good for our family. She walks around with her expensive jewelry and her fancy education, looking down on us regular people who actually work for what we have." I was still in shock from the physical attack, but Patricia's words hit me like another slap. After 2 years of trying to build a relationship with this woman, after bending over backwards to be respectful and accommodating, she was revealing what she'd really thought of me all along. "That's enough," Thomas said firmly, stepping between Patricia and the rest of us. "Patricia, you need to calm down and think about what you're saying. You just attacked Sophia, and now you're insulting her and her family. This isn't acceptable behavior." But Patricia turned on Thomas with the same venom she'd directed at me. "Oh, so you're taking their side too? After everything I've done for this family, after all the years I've worked and sacrificed, you're going to defend her over me?" "I'm not taking sides," Thomas said, but his voice was shaking. "I'm trying to understand why my wife just tried to steal someone's wedding ring and is now having a breakdown in our kitchen." That's when Patricia said something that revealed the true depth of her delusion and entitlement. "I wasn't stealing anything. That ring should have been mine in the first place. Marcus should have used his grandmother's ring, my mother-in-law's ring, for his proposal. But no, he had to go spend a fortune on something new because Princess Sophia is too good for family heirlooms." The room went completely silent. Marcus, Thomas, and I all stared at Patricia as the implications of what she'd just said sank in. She wasn't just obsessed with my ring because of its value. She felt entitled to it because she believed Marcus should have proposed with a different ring entirely, one that would have connected me to her side of the family instead of allowing me to have something completely separate. "Mom," Marcus said slowly, "Grandma Blackwood's ring was a simple gold band with a tiny chip diamond. It's beautiful for what it is, but it's not comparable to Sophia's ring. And besides, I wanted to give Sophia something that was uniquely ours, not connected to anyone else's marriage." "Exactly!" Patricia shrieked. "You wanted to give her something special, something expensive, something that would impress her rich family. You were never like this before you met her. You never cared about expensive things or showing off. She changed you." The accusation was so unfair and so completely wrong that I finally found my voice. "Patricia, I never asked Marcus for an expensive ring. I never even knew how much it cost until after we were engaged. And I would have been just as happy with your mother-in-law's ring if that's what Marcus had chosen to give me." "Liar!" Patricia screamed, pointing at me with genuine hatred in her eyes. You and your family with your money and your attitude, acting like you're better than us. You think we don't see how you look at our house, our neighborhood, our lives? You think we don't know that you're slumming it with Marcus until something better comes along? The words were so cruel and so far from the truth that I started crying. Not from fear anymore, but from the heartbreak of realizing that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to build a relationship with Patricia, she would always see me as an enemy. Marcus stepped protectively in front of me, his face flushed with anger. That's it. We're leaving. Right now. No, Patricia cried, suddenly switching back to desperation. Please don't go. We can work this out. I'm sorry I grabbed the ring, but you have to understand. I was just worried about it. Can't we just forget this happened and move on? The whiplash between her vicious attacks and her sudden pleading was disturbing. It was clear that Patricia had no real understanding of what she'd done wrong or why her behavior was unacceptable. In her mind, we should just overlook a physical assault and theft attempt because she claimed good intentions. Forget this happened? I said, finding strength in my voice for the first time since the attack. Patricia, you physically assaulted me and tried to steal my wedding ring. You left bruises on my wrist and made my finger bleed. You can't just apologize and pretend that's normal behavior. I didn't assault anyone, she protested. I was trying to help. You're being dramatic. That's when Marcus said something that changed everything. Mom, I'm calling the police. The kitchen erupted. Patricia started screaming that we couldn't call the police on family, that it was just a misunderstanding, that we were trying to destroy her life over nothing. Thomas was begging Marcus to reconsider, saying that involving the police would tear the family apart. But Marcus was resolute. She assaulted my wife, he said firmly. She tried to steal Sophia's wedding ring. If she was a stranger who did this, we'd call the police without question. The fact that she's my mother doesn't give her the right to commit crimes. I watched Patricia's face as Marcus pulled out his phone to dial 911, and what I saw there wasn't remorse or fear. It was pure, calculating rage. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was furious that there were going to be consequences for it. And that's when I knew that this was far from over. Patricia wasn't going to accept responsibility. She wasn't going to change her behavior. And she certainly wasn't going to leave us alone. If anything, involving the police was going to make her more determined to punish us for daring to hold her accountable. But I also knew that Marcus was right. What Patricia had done was criminal, and treating it like a family squabble would only enable her to escalate further. As much as it terrified me to think about what she might do next, we had crossed the point where we could handle this privately. The real nightmare was just beginning. The police arrived within 15 minutes of Marcus's call, and Patricia's behavior during their visit was a masterclass in manipulation and victim playing that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so disturbing to witness. The moment she heard the sirens approaching, her entire demeanor changed from the rage-filled woman who'd been screaming at us to a fragile, confused elderly victim who couldn't understand why her family was being so cruel to her. Officer Martinez and Officer Chen were both professional and thorough in their response. They separated us into different rooms to get individual statements, and I could hear Patricia in the living room with Officer Chen, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion as she described what she claimed had happened. I was just trying to help, I heard her say through the thin walls. My daughter-in-law was being careless with her very expensive wedding ring, and I was concerned it might get damaged. When I tried to show her how to properly examine it for loose stones, she started screaming and claiming I was attacking her. I think she might be having some kind of mental health crisis. The audacity was breathtaking. Patricia was literally rewriting the events that had happened 20 minutes earlier, turning her violent assault into a helpful jewelry inspection, and my justified fear into evidence of mental instability. But what was more disturbing was how convincing she sounded. The perfect combination of concern, confusion, and hurt that would make anyone who hadn't witnessed the actual events question what had really happened. When Officer Martinez interviewed me in the kitchen, I showed him the bruises already darkening on my wrist and the cuts on my finger where Patricia had tried to force the ring off. I explained exactly what had happened, from Patricia's sudden personality change to her violent attempt to steal my ring. Officer Martinez photographed the injuries and took detailed notes, and I could tell he'd seen domestic violence situations before and recognized the signs. Marcus's statement corroborated mine completely, and Thomas, despite his obvious reluctance to get his wife in trouble, confirmed that he'd seen Patricia forcibly grab my wrist and try to remove my ring. The physical evidence and witness testimony made it clear that Patricia's version of events was fabricated. But Patricia wasn't backing down from her story. When Officer Chen confronted her with the inconsistencies between her account and everyone else's, she doubled down on her claims and added new elements that were even more disturbing. "I'm worried about Sophia," she told the officers, her voice full of fake maternal concern. "Ever since she married into our family, she's been acting strangely, paranoid, suspicious, always thinking people are trying to take things from her. Her husband works so hard to provide for her, but she's never satisfied. She's always talking about money and expensive things. I think the pressure of maintaining her wealthy lifestyle might be affecting her mental health." I was listening to this from the kitchen, and the calculated cruelty of it made me physically sick. Patricia was trying to paint me as mentally unstable, greedy, and materialistic, the exact opposite of who I actually was, in an attempt to discredit my account of her assault. She was weaponizing mental health stigma to avoid consequences for her criminal behavior. Officer Martinez asked me directly if I wanted to press charges, and I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "What she did was assault and attempted theft. If she was a stranger who attacked me and tried to steal my jewelry, you'd arrest her. The fact that she's my mother-in-law doesn't change what she did." Patricia was arrested that night for assault and attempted theft. As Officer Chen placed her in handcuffs, she continued her performance, crying about how her own family was destroying her life over a misunderstanding and how she couldn't believe Marcus would let his mother be arrested. "I raised you better than this," she sobbed at Marcus as they led her to the patrol car. "I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me? By choosing her over your own mother?" Marcus stood firm, but I could see how much it was costing him emotionally. "Mom, you did this to yourself," he said quietly. "I love you, but I won't let you hurt my wife." Patricia spent the night in county jail and was released the next morning on her own recognizance with a court date scheduled for the following month. I naively hoped that spending a night in jail might shock her into recognizing the seriousness of her actions and maybe seeking help for whatever was driving her obsessive behavior. I was wrong. If anything, the arrest seemed to fuel Patricia's sense of victimhood and her determination to punish us for holding her accountable. The harassment campaign began almost immediately. Within hours of her release, Patricia was calling and texting Marcus nonstop, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. The messages ranged from, "I'm sorry for trying to protect your investment," to, "Your wife has turned you into someone I don't recognize," to, "I can't believe you chose money over family." When Marcus stopped responding to her messages, Patricia started calling me directly. The voicemails she left were disturbing in their intensity and increasingly unhinged in their content. "Sophia, I know you think you've won, but you haven't," said one message I received on Tuesday morning. "You can't keep my son away from me forever. Family is forever, and I'll always be his mother no matter what lies you tell about me." Another message left at 2 a.m. on Wednesday was even more troubling. "You think your daddy's money makes you better than us, but money can't buy real love. Marcus will figure out what you really are eventually, and when he does, I'll be here waiting for him." The messages became more frequent and more aggressive. Patricia started calling my work phone, my parents' house, and even tracked down my sister's number somehow. She left rambling voicemails about how I was destroying her family and how she was fighting for her son's soul. But the most disturbing escalation came when Patricia started showing up places where she knew I'd be. She appeared at my grocery store, my coffee shop, and even outside my school, always maintaining just enough distance that it couldn't technically be called stalking, but making sure I saw her watching me. The psychological effect was exhausting. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my surroundings, and feeling anxious about routine activities. Patricia had turned my own neighborhood into a place where I didn't feel safe or comfortable. When I told Marcus about the harassment, he immediately called Patricia and told her to stop contacting us. Her response was to escalate further. She started calling Marcus's workplace, telling his colleagues and supervisor that he was going through a difficult time with his marriage and that she was concerned about his emotional state. Patricia also began reaching out to extended family members, spinning a narrative about how Marcus and I were keeping her away from her son because I was jealous of their close relationship. She told Marcus's aunts and cousins that I had attacked her when she tried to give me advice about caring for expensive jewelry, and that Marcus was so controlled by me that he'd actually had his own mother arrested. The manipulation was systematic and effective. Family members who barely knew me started reaching out to Marcus with concerns about our marriage and suggestions that maybe he should work things out with his mother. Some of them even contacted me directly, asking if I was okay and hinting that maybe I was being too sensitive about Patricia's behavior. The most painful betrayal came from Marcus's Aunt Linda, his father's sister, who had always been kind to me before. Linda called Marcus and suggested that maybe family counseling would be better than involving the legal system, and that pressing charges against Patricia was tearing the family apart unnecessarily. "She's your mother, Marcus," Linda said during a phone call I overheard. "Whatever happened between her and Sophia, surely it can be worked out within the family. Getting lawyers and courts involved just makes everything worse." What Linda didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Patricia's behavior had crossed far beyond the realm of family disagreements or personality conflicts. This wasn't about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. It was about criminal behavior and escalating harassment that was affecting every aspect of our lives. The stress was taking a toll on both Marcus and me. We were both sleeping poorly, constantly, on edge, and struggling to maintain normal routines while dealing with Patricia's campaign of harassment and manipulation. Our relationship was solid, but the external pressure was exhausting. That's when I made the decision to tell my parents what was happening. I'd been trying to handle the situation without involving my family, partly to protect Marcus from feeling embarrassed about his mother's behavior, and partly because I hoped we could resolve things without escalating to that level. But Patricia's harassment was intensifying, and I was starting to feel genuinely unsafe. When I called my mother and told her about the assault, the arrest, and the ongoing harassment campaign, her response was immediate and fierce. "Sophia, why didn't you tell us about this sooner?" Mom demanded. "This woman attacked you and is now stalking you. This isn't something you handle alone." When I told Dad what had happened, his reaction was even more intense. Dad had built his business empire by being strategic, thorough, and utterly ruthless when someone threatened his family. Patricia had made the mistake of targeting his daughter, and she was about to discover exactly what that meant. "No one touches my family," Dad said quietly, and I could hear the cold fury in his voice that had destroyed countless business rivals over the years. "This woman thinks she can assault my daughter and harass my family without consequences. She's about to learn otherwise." I tried to tell Dad that I just wanted the harassment to stop, that I didn't want to escalate things further, but he was already making plans. "Sophia, honey, sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them that picking on you was the biggest mistake of their life," he said. "This Patricia woman thinks she knows about consequences? She hasn't seen anything. Yet." That's when I realized that Patricia's decision to target me hadn't just brought the legal system into her life. It had brought the attention of Vincent Castellano, a man who had never lost a fight that mattered to him, and who considered protecting his family the most important fight of his life. Dad didn't waste any time. Within 24 hours of our conversation, he had deployed the kind of investigative resources that most people don't even know exist. While I was dealing with Patricia's continued harassment calls and Marcus was trying to focus on work despite his mother's campaign to undermine him with his colleagues, Dad was quietly gathering information about every aspect of Patricia and Thomas's financial life. What he discovered was both shocking and entirely predictable. Patricia, who had spent months lecturing me about financial responsibility and making pointed comments about young couples getting in over their heads, was herself drowning in debt and living far beyond her means. The picture that emerged from Dad's investigation revealed a woman who had been lying about her financial situation for years, even to her own husband. Patricia had credit cards that Thomas didn't know about, totaling over $47,000 in debt across 7 different accounts. She'd been using cash advances from one card to make minimum payments on others, creating a house of cards that was inevitably going to collapse. Her part-time bookkeeping income was barely covering her personal expenses, let alone contributing to the household finances she claimed to manage so responsibly. But the most damaging discovery was that Patricia had been systematically lying about their mortgage situation. Thomas believed they had a standard 30-year mortgage with about 12 years remaining and manageable monthly payments. In reality, Patricia had refinanced their house 3 times in the past 5 years, each time pulling out equity to pay off card debt, only to run up new balances within months. Their current mortgage was an adjustable-rate loan with payments that had been increasing steadily and were scheduled to jump significantly at the next adjustment period in just 2 months. Instead of the $1,200 monthly payment Thomas thought they were making, Patricia had been struggling to cover payments that had already risen to $2,100 and were about to increase to nearly $12,800. The most devastating part was that Patricia had been covering the difference by borrowing against Thomas's retirement account and taking cash advances from her secret credit cards. She'd forged Thomas's signature on several loan documents and had been intercepting bank statements and financial documents to hide the true scope of their debt. Dad's investigation also revealed that Patricia had been lying about her work situation. She'd told Thomas and Marcus that her bookkeeping clients were doing well, and that she was earning about $2,000 per month from her various accounts. In reality, she'd lost 2 of her biggest clients in the past 6 months due to errors in their books. Errors that suggested Patricia's financial management skills were not what she claimed them to be. The complete picture was of a woman living in financial fantasy land, drowning in debt while lecturing others about fiscal responsibility, and apparently willing to commit forgery and fraud to maintain her facade of middle-class stability. But Dad's investigation went beyond just financial records. He also discovered that Patricia had been lying about other aspects of her life, including her interactions with our family and her version of recent events. Dad's security team had obtained recordings of voicemails Patricia had left for extended family members, and the content was far more damaging than even we had realized. In one particularly disturbing message to Marcus's cousin Jennifer, Patricia had claimed that I'd physically attacked her during our dinner, and that Marcus had called the police on her to protect his wife's lies. She told Jennifer that I'd threatened to have my father destroy her financially if she didn't stay away from Marcus, and that the assault charges were completely fabricated. Another recording, from a message Patricia left for Marcus's Aunt Linda, included claims that I was mentally unstable and violent, and that she was terrified of what I might do next. She begged Linda to help her get Marcus away from that dangerous woman before I completely destroyed his life. The systematic nature of Patricia's lies was staggering. She wasn't just defending herself or trying to minimize her actions. She was actively working to destroy my reputation and turn Marcus's entire extended family against me with completely fabricated stories of violence and threats that had never happened. Dad's response to these discoveries was swift and surgical. On a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Patricia's arrest, she received a phone call that would change her life forever. The call came from Brad Hensworth, Senior Vice President at Pinnacle Mortgage Services, the company that held Patricia and Thomas's home loan. Mr. Hensworth informed Patricia that their mortgage had been selected for an immediate comprehensive review due to irregularities in the account history, and that the bank had concerns about fraudulent activity associated with the loan. Patricia was informed that she had 72 hours to provide complete financial documentation for herself and Thomas, including all bank statements, credit card accounts, employment records, and tax returns for the past 3 years. She was also told that the bank had identified potential signature discrepancies on loan modification documents and that they were considering referring the matter to law enforcement for investigation of possible mortgage fraud. The call was devastating enough, but what came next was even worse. Within hours of the Pinnacle mortgage call, Patricia received similar calls from every single one of her credit card companies. Each company informed her that her account was being reviewed for suspicious activity and that her credit lines were being immediately frozen pending investigation. By Friday afternoon, Patricia discovered that her secret financial house of cards was completely exposed. Every credit card was frozen, her mortgage was under fraud investigation, and somehow Thomas had been contacted by Pinnacle Mortgage and informed of the irregularities in their account that his wife would need to explain. But Dad wasn't finished. Patricia's remaining bookkeeping clients received anonymous tips about concerns regarding financial discrepancies in their accounts, along with suggestions that they might want to have independent audits performed on their books. Within days, Patricia lost her last 2 clients and was facing potential legal action from one of them, who discovered significant errors that had cost his business money in tax penalties. The psychological pressure was intense and relentless. Patricia found herself dealing with phone calls from creditors, mortgage investigators, and former clients while trying to explain to Thomas how their financial situation had become so catastrophic without his knowledge. But instead of accepting responsibility for her deception and fraud, Patricia doubled down on blaming me and my family for her problems. Patricia began telling anyone who would listen that my family was financially destroying her because she'd stood up to their entitled daughter. She claimed that my father was using his wealth and connections to ruin an innocent woman who had done nothing wrong except try to protect her son from a manipulative wife. The victim narrative Patricia constructed was elaborate and completely divorced from reality. According to her version of events, she was a hard-working, honest woman being persecuted by a billionaire's family because she dared to question their daughter's treatment of her son. She claimed that her financial problems were the result of my father's criminal harassment rather than her own years of fraud and deception. Patricia's desperation led her to make increasingly poor decisions. She contacted a local TV news station, claiming to have a story about wealthy family using their power to destroy working-class people. When the reporter looked into her claims and discovered the assault charges, the credit card fraud, and the mortgage irregularities, the station declined to run her story. Undeterred, Patricia hired a lawyer, using money from a payday loan she managed to secure despite her destroyed credit, and threatened to sue my father for harassment and financial terrorism. The lawyer, after reviewing the case and realizing that Patricia's claims were largely fabricated, withdrew from representation within a week. But Patricia's most destructive decision came when she decided to escalate her harassment campaign against Marcus and me. Since her financial pressures were mounting, and she blamed us for her problems, she concluded that the solution was to force Marcus to choose between his wife and his mother by making our lives so miserable that we'd have to give in to her demands. Patricia began showing up at our house at all hours, sometimes sitting in her car outside our home for hours at a time, creating a constant sense of being watched and threatened. She left notes on our door claiming that she forgave us for destroying her life and was ready to work things out if we would just drop the criminal charges and ask my father to stop his attacks on her. The notes became increasingly unhinged, with Patricia claiming that she was fighting for her family and wouldn't give up until Marcus came to his senses and stopped choosing money over his mother. She began signing the notes, "Your loving mother-in-law who will never give up on family." When we installed security cameras to document her harassment, Patricia started wearing disguises, hats, sunglasses, different clothes, apparently believing that this would prevent us from identifying her on video. The footage we captured showed a woman who was clearly not thinking rationally, talking to herself while walking around our property and gesturing angrily at our house. The final straw came when Patricia, apparently convinced that her financial problems were temporary setbacks that could be resolved if she could just get Marcus back on her side, decided to force a confrontation by attempting to enter our house while we were both at work. Marcus received a call from our security company on a Tuesday afternoon, informing him that motion sensors had detected someone inside our house during a time when we should both have been at work. The security footage showed Patricia using a key, which she must have copied at some point during her previous visits, to enter our home and systematically go through our belongings. The video showed Patricia in our bedroom, going through my jewelry box and examining each piece carefully. She spent nearly 20 minutes looking through our financial documents, taking photos of bank statements and investment accounts with her phone. Most disturbing of all, she was recorded sitting on our bed, holding my wedding ring cleaning cloth, and talking to herself about how things could have been different if Sophia had just listened. When police arrived to arrest Patricia for breaking and entering, they found her still in our house, in my closet, going through my clothing and muttering about how expensive everything was and how I didn't deserve any of it. This second arrest was different from the first. Patricia's behavior was so erratic and disconnected from reality that the judge ordered a psychological evaluation before setting bail. She spent 3 days in psychiatric hold, during which time the full scope of her financial fraud was finally exposed to Thomas and the rest of the family. But even after being confronted with undeniable evidence of her deception, fraud, and criminal behavior, Patricia remained convinced that she was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by my family to destroy her life. In her mind, everything that was happening to her was punishment for trying to protect her son from a manipulative woman and her corrupt family. The delusion was complete, and it was about to get much worse. The psychological evaluation that Patricia underwent during her 3-day psychiatric hold revealed the true extent of her mental state deterioration, but the results were not what anyone expected. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the court-appointed psychiatrist, concluded that while Patricia showed signs of severe anxiety, depression, and delusional thinking patterns, she was competent to stand trial and understand the consequences of her actions. What made Dr. Mitchell's report particularly damaging was her assessment that Patricia's delusions were not the result of a psychotic break or mental illness, but rather the logical endpoint of years of narcissistic behavior, entitlement, and an inability to accept responsibility for her actions. In other words, Patricia wasn't legally insane. She was simply a person who had convinced herself that her wants and needs justified any behavior, no matter how destructive or criminal. The report stated that Patricia exhibited a profound inability to empathize with others, combined with a grandiose sense of entitlement and a persistent pattern of manipulative behavior designed to control her environment and the people in it. Dr. Mitchell noted that Patricia's claims of being persecuted by my family were elaborate justifications for her own criminal behavior, rather than genuine delusions. Most significantly, Dr. Mitchell concluded that Patricia posed a continued danger to Marcus and me, writing, "The subject demonstrates escalating boundary violations, stalking behavior, and an obsessive focus on the victims that suggests she will continue to engage in harmful acts until external constraints are imposed." When Patricia was released on a significantly higher bail, $25,000 instead of her own recognizance, Thomas was faced with a choice that would define the rest of their marriage. He could either mortgage their already financially troubled home to bail out his wife, or he could let her remain in jail until trial. The decision became even more complicated when Thomas finally saw the complete picture of Patricia's financial deception. The mortgage fraud investigation had revealed forged signatures, hidden debts, and years of lies that had put their home and Thomas's retirement in jeopardy. Thomas learned that instead of being financially stable as he'd believed, he was actually facing potential bankruptcy and the loss of everything he'd worked for his entire life. But the final straw for Thomas came when he was shown the security footage of Patricia breaking into our house. Watching his wife systematically go through our belongings, taking photos of our financial documents, and sitting on our bed while talking to herself about how I didn't deserve my possessions, Thomas finally saw Patricia's behavior for what it really was. "I don't know who this woman is," Thomas told Marcus during a heartbreaking phone conversation. "The woman I married wouldn't break into someone's house, wouldn't forge my signature on loan documents, wouldn't lie to me for years about our finances. I feel like I've been living with a stranger." Thomas made the difficult decision not to bail Patricia out. For the first time in their marriage, he was refusing to enable her behavior or rescue her from the consequences of her actions. Patricia would remain in jail until her trial, which was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The news of Patricia's continued incarceration and the reasons behind it spread quickly through Marcus's extended family. The same relatives who had initially criticized us for pressing charges and suggested family counseling as an alternative to legal action were now seeing police reports, psychiatric evaluations, and evidence of years of fraud and deception. Marcus's Aunt Linda, who had been one of Patricia's strongest defenders, called Marcus after learning about the mortgage fraud and breaking and entering charges. "Marcus, I owe you and Sophia an apology," she said, her voice shaking. I had no idea how serious this was. When Patricia called me crying about being arrested, I thought it was some kind of family misunderstanding that got out of hand. I didn't know she'd been lying about everything. One by one, the family members who Patricia had manipulated with her victim narrative began to see the truth. The security footage of her breaking into our house was particularly damaging to her credibility. It was impossible to frame systematically searching through someone's belongings and taking photos of their financial documents as anything other than predatory and criminal behavior. But Patricia wasn't giving up. From jail, she began making phone calls to anyone who would listen, now claiming that she was being held as a political prisoner because my father had bought off the judge and prosecutors. She told anyone who would accept her collect calls that the psychiatric evaluation was rigged and that Dr. Mitchell had been paid to make her look crazy. The calls became increasingly desperate and unhinged. Patricia contacted local news stations, claiming she had evidence of corruption in the justice system and wealthy families buying their way out of consequences. When reporters investigated her claims and discovered her history of fraud and stalking, they declined to cover her story. Patricia even attempted to call my parents directly, somehow obtaining their private phone number and leaving rambling voicemails about how she was fighting for justice and how they would face consequences for destroying an innocent woman. The voicemails were turned over to her defense attorney as evidence of her continued harassment and inability to understand appropriate boundaries. The breaking point for Patricia's remaining supporters came when she made the catastrophic decision to represent herself at her trial after her court-appointed attorney withdrew from the case. Patricia had become convinced that her lawyer was part of the conspiracy against her and that she could better represent herself than someone who didn't understand the truth. The trial was a disaster for Patricia from the moment it began. Representing herself against charges of assault, attempted theft, stalking, and breaking and entering, Patricia used her opening statement to launch into a rambling conspiracy theory about how my family had orchestrated her persecution because she'd tried to protect her son from a manipulative wife. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented the security footage of Patricia breaking into our house, medical photos of the bruises on my wrist from her assault, recordings of her harassing voicemails, evidence of her stalking behavior, and testimony from multiple witnesses who had seen her erratic conduct. But instead of mounting a coherent defense, Patricia used her time in court to make increasingly wild accusations. She claimed that the security footage had been digitally altered, that my injuries were self-inflicted, and that the entire case was a frame-up orchestrated by billionaire criminals. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Chen, initially showed patience with Patricia's self-representation, but her behavior became so disruptive and inappropriate that she was eventually held in contempt of court multiple times. Patricia interrupted witness testimony, made accusations against the judge herself, and at one point stood up and pointed at me in the gallery while shouting that I was a lying sociopath who destroyed families for fun. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Patricia's reaction to the verdict was a complete meltdown that required bailiffs to restrain her. She screamed that the trial had been rigged, that she was innocent of everything, and that she would never stop fighting for justice. Judge Chen sentenced Patricia to 18 months in prison for the combined charges, followed by 3 years of probation with a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Marcus or me. Additionally, Patricia was ordered to undergo mandatory psychological counseling and anger management treatment. But even in the face of overwhelming evidence and a criminal conviction, Patricia remained convinced that she was the victim. Her final statement to the court was a rambling speech about how she was being punished for trying to protect her family and how corrupt wealthy people had bought her conviction. The most heartbreaking part of the entire ordeal was watching Thomas sit in the courtroom as his wife was convicted and sentenced. The man who had loved and supported Patricia for years was finally seeing her for who she really was, and the grief on his face was devastating to witness. After the sentencing, Marcus approached Thomas in the courthouse hallway. "I'm sorry it came to this," Marcus said quietly. "I know how much you love her." Thomas looked older than I'd ever seen him, worn down by months of revelations about the woman he'd thought he knew. "I love the woman I thought I married," he replied. "But I don't think that woman ever really existed. I think Patricia has been playing a role for so long that she forgot who she really was underneath it all." The trial had accomplished what months of family discussions and interventions could not. It had finally shown everyone exactly who Patricia really was and what she was capable of. There was no more room for excuses, justifications, or family. Loyalty, overriding accountability. But even as Patricia was led away to begin her prison sentence, I knew that our ordeal wasn't completely over. She had shown a level of obsession and determination that suggested she would use her time in prison to plan her next move rather than reflect on her behavior and seek genuine help. The question wasn't whether Patricia would try to continue her campaign against us. It was what form that campaign would take and how we could protect ourselves from whatever she might do next. Because one thing had become crystal clear throughout this entire nightmare. Patricia Blackwood was not a woman who accepted defeat, and she certainly wasn't someone who would easily give up her obsession with destroying the life Marcus and I had built together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.